Hi all, welcome to Physio Exam Buddy. This video is on the inverse stretch reflex. The synonym for inverse stretch reflex is autogenic inhibition. It is just the relaxation in response to a strong stretch. That is, harder when a muscle is stretched, stronger will be the reflex reaction. But when the tension becomes great enough, the contraction will suddenly ceases and the muscle will relax. That is, the relaxation will occur in response to a strong stretch in case of skeletal muscle. And this reflex, it is known as the inverse stretch reflex. And the receptor for the inverse stretch reflex, or also known as the autogenic inhibition, is basically the Golgi tendon organ. Golgi tendon organ, they are basically located in the knobby nerve endings, which is present among the vesicles of the tendon of the skeletal muscle. And they are basically inhibitory to the muscle tone. Next is about the reflex arc of the inverse stretch reflex. Here, the receptor, it is the Golgi tendon organ, which is present in the tendon of the skeletal muscle. And from there, the afferent, it is carried by the 1B fiber into the center, which is a spinal segment of the same level. And here, in case of inverse stretch reflex, there will be an interneuron, which is present in the same level of the spinal column. And the neurotransmitter secreted by this interneuron is usually an inhibitory mediator, that is usually glycine will be the neurotransmitter secreted by the interneuron. And from there, the impulses will be moving on to the efferent neuron. The efferent is basically the alpha motor neuron supplying the same skeletal muscle. So that is about the reflex arc of the inverse stretch reflex. Now, when the stimulation of the 1B fibers, it produces actually inhibitory postsynaptic potential, that is IPSPs on the alpha motor neurons in the same muscle. That is because the neurotransmitter here secreted is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is a glycine. And this 1B fibers usually end in this inhibitory neurons and they will terminate directly on the alpha motor neuron supplying the same skeletal muscle. Whereas the excitatory connections with the motor neurons will occur supplying the antagonist of the muscle. Now about the functions of the inverse stretch reflex. The main function is it will prevent the excessive tension developing on the muscle. Basically because of an inhibitory effect of this inverse stretch reflex, and this reaction, it is also known by another term, that is lengthening reaction. Basically this inverse stretch reflex is a protective mechanism, that is it will help to prevent the tearing of the muscle or avulsion of the tendon from its attachment because of this inhibitory interneuron present in this inverse stretch reflex. The next function is that it will also equalize the contractile force among the muscle fibers. That is, the fibers exerting excessive tension will become inhibited, whereas those exerting only too little tension becomes more excited. That is, absence of inhibition occurs in those muscle fibers which are having only very little tension, whereas those having excess tension will be inhibited. So like that, this inverse stretch reflex is basically an protective mechanism. That's about the inverse stretch reflex. Thank you.